Hello and welcome to the Powerful African Women, the POW podcast.
The podcast to empower the POW in you.
I'm Aïssatou.
And I'm Saran.
And today it's a guest with more than 17,000 followers on Instagram who defines herself as, I quote, the Afro-world globetrotter, a Black history explorer, finder of stylish outings who is with us. You may have recognized her, it's Sandy, founder of Abnafrica.
We'll discuss her identities and dreams and how she embraced them.
We'll introduce the topic,
share our experiences and argue our points of view.
At the end of the podcast, we'll give our recommendations, so stay tuned
and listen.
In this episode, we offer an English version of our episode 10 with Sandy, which was recorded in French. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the POW podcast, our 10th episode. And yes, it's been over a year since the adventure started for us. 1 year, 9 episodes, 10 guests, hours and hours of recording, editing, and translation. In short, a busy year. We sincerely wanted to thank all our faithful listeners. All this would not have been possible without your engagement, advice, and listening. So a big thank you to you. We're back for the new year. Yes, we needed a little break to take a breather. For my part, I explored Portugal and Greece, two very, very pleasant but touristy spots, and they were less crowded this time, so I would recommend going for anyone who didn't have the chance to already go there.
And for my part, I decided to stay in the US with my family. I didn't decide. We couldn't travel anywhere else, but I decided to stay with my family. And since it was a long time, I didn't spend time with them. So I enjoyed and I took this opportunity to hang out. I also took the opportunity to travel around New York, LA, Baltimore, and Memphis. So yeah, I've been keeping myself busy as well.
So we started with the presentation of the guest, asking her 5 POW questions. For the POW ID, the guest of the day chose Sandy. As a POW country of identification, Sandy does not hesitate to cite Guadeloupe because it's her parents' country of origin and it's the only place on earth where she feels completely aligned with herself. Her heart also vibrates for Ghana since it's the first African country she has visited. When asked what her POW goal was, she wants to inspire, transmit, and empower the Afro descents through Abnafrica and other projects. She also wants to be able to live comfortably in her villa in Ghana with her husband and 4 children and also a driver, while helping the community. Let's talk briefly about Sandy's journey. She did a scientific baccalaureate and then a preparatory class called ECS in France. Then she got into a business school called Rennes Business School. She also did a master's degree at Central Paris, doing an apprenticeship so that she could continue studying while receiving some money. And now she's an international software purchaser. Finally, because POW is also about having fun, we asked her what her hobby were. She mentioned the quote, "Choose a job you love and you will never have to work a day in your life." She loves working for Abnafrica, reading books for Abnafrica, eating in African restaurant for Abnafrica. But apart from that, she also liked playing the violin.
Okay, thank you, Aïssatou. Following these first introductory questions, it was then time to move on to the part I personally prefer, the fireside chat. We put in competition 3 countries that she knows very well, Guadeloupe, Côte d'Ivoire, and Senegal. Between Accras, a braised chicken acheke, and a cheboujen, she chose the Accras as a good patriot. We continue the fireside chat by asking to make a complicated choice between Aimé Césaire and Felwine Sarr. She does not hesitate to opt for Felwine Sarr. Finally, to the open question, we asked her, what imprint do you want to leave of yourself?
I just want to convey good vibe to my surrounding and have a positive impact through Abnafrica.
Then it was time to start the heart of the podcast, the discussion with Sandy. This discussion is divided into 2 parts. The success story on the one hand, then the social subject chosen by the guest, Afro descent and full cultural appropriation. First, we offer you a complete transcript of the first part, the success story of our guest. Let us talk about Sandy. I personally discovered Sandy through one of her IG publication, 5 books to learn Black history, which I will read to you the description. Blackout Tuesday, gatherings, global outrage, and now what do? I say that we continue to make our voices heard. I also say that it is time for us to start thinking and, above all, applying long-term solutions. My proposal, you already know them. They are the 3 pillars of Abnafrica from the beginning. Past, knowing our history. Present, be aware of our current strength. Hashtag voyage, which means travels. Hashtag Afroword and hashtag les richesses de chez nous, which means wealth from our home. Future, building our hashtag by Black Future. It's powerful, right? It's 100% POW. And through her platform, Abnafrica, Sandy emphasized Black culture in its broadest sense. Therefore, it was this globetrotter of the Afroword, explorer of Black history, and stylish exit finder who agreed to be our guest. Thank you very much, Sandy, and welcome.
With great pleasure. I'm honored to be here, especially for the dance show.
Thank you, Sandy. So this brings us to our first question. Who is Sandy? Tell us briefly about your journey, your achievements, and your motivations.
Who is Sandy? I'm the girl behind Abnafrica. In reality, it takes up so much space in my life that when I am asked who I am, it is mostly that for the last 2 years. On Abnafrica, I'm talking about yesterday's Afro-descendants, I'm talking about nowadays Afro-descendants, and I'm talking about Afro-descendants around the world. These are the 3 pillars of my work today. When I say yesterday Afro-descendants, I'm referring to our history, what we are not taught at school. When I say nowadays Afro-descendants, I'm talking about our culture and all those things that bring us together between Africa and the diaspora, things that can be denigrated in the media, but that we should be proud of, like our dialects, eating with our hands, etc. When I say that I'm talking about Afro-descendants in the world, it's because I'm talking about Sandy. I've been traveling a lot since I was a kid, and more recently, since the age of 18, I have traveled to the countries of the Afro world, Africa and its diaspora, so Caribbean and Latin America. And I travel a lot in this country because I want to deconstruct preconceived ideas around them. And I want us to realize the rich culture of regions like Dakar, Kigali, Pretoria, etc., and other areas of this world. That's what I do through Abnafrica. And the last point that is super important and answer the question of who Sandy is the Afro Agenda part. It is a monthly agenda bringing together the best events, exhibitions, workshops on Black history and everything related to the Afro world. I refer all this in my Afro Agenda for myself and also to give ideas to the people who follow me and encourage them to check them out.
Frankly, thank you for your initiatives. We needed it for the African and Afro diaspora, but it is also something we need in France, actually. Did I mention that Abnafrica is available on Instagram and on her website? You have to check them out for more inspiration. You will definitely not regret it. This brings us to the second question that is the very genesis of Abnafrica. How Abnafrica's project was born in you, Sandy?
So, how was it born in me? There are 2 answers to that. The first, it had always been in me because I was raised by a West Indian father, proud of his African roots at that time when the African and West Indian relationship was quite special. I would say at the time in the early 2000s, there was not a lot of content that allowed us to deconstruct ourselves and see what Africa really is. So, my father would take us to cultural events, he would put us in front of the TV so that we could watch films about our history. One of the triggers was my first year of preparatory classes, and here's an anecdote that quite traumatized me. In preparatory classes, we are constantly told that we are the elite of France. Then I got into my history class and I observed what we are told and I say sorry. It's important to explain this because we have thousands of books to read in preparatory classes, 1 book by region of the world. First error, the book for Africa was combined with that of Middle East. Second, there was too much aberration about what was being told in it. I had a click when I realized what was being taught to the elite of France. And I told myself that at some point, I will take the initiative to know everything there is to know about my history and my culture. Since I was in preparatory class, I didn't necessarily have a life, and it was when I entered professional life that I had a little more time, and that's how Abnafrica was born.
All right. And what is Abnafrica today? Is that what you thought it would be at first?
Yes and no. With Abnafrica, I told myself I'm not going to talk about anything but history. And as I travel a lot, I started adding a rubric about it. And since I enjoy going out and my friends are always asking me how I find my events, I went along and found myself with all these extra categories. In entrepreneurship, you test and realize that what you wanted to do thoroughly is not necessarily what works the most. People loved the stories about my trip to the Afro-world countries, and it was not planned. And many people commented that they are rediscovering their own country through my stories, and that was nice. The same goes for the Afro agenda. I received pictures of people who wanted to go to NYC but decided to go to Senegal. That's the impact I wanted. Another thing I had not planned was all the excitement on social media. Huge interactions, I met people who follow me. It's really different from what I expected.
Okay, so I know you give a lot for Urban Africa, and I'd like to know, how do you manage to reconcile Urban Africa, your work, and your personal life?
It's been a little more than 2 years now since I created Abn Africa, and for all this time I have been asking myself this question over and over, and it's super complicated. I went from 200 followers to 17,000 followers on Instagram, and producing the content is doable, but I did not think about responding to the comments, for instance. And in addition, when something works, you either freak out and get lost or you try to do better. And in all modesty, when I started 2 years ago, I made sure to do 20 times better today in my content, in my articles. And all this takes time, and to manage everything, I have a drastic organization. If I don't follow my routine, I get lost. And I have my morning miracle, which helps me a lot to achieve my daily goals. And if I had time, I would even sell my routine.
Si j'avais le temps, je le vendrais même.
And I would definitely buy that routine because I need it.
Come and get it.
Okay, so one of my favorite hobbies is to travel. And I see that you do travel a lot. What touched you the most during those travels that you made?
When I sell the Afro world, I encourage people to go mostly outside their home country, but still in the Afro world. Since most of these countries are not very touristic, when you go there, you feel like a queen, which is priceless. For example, when I went to Grand Bassam, it felt like it was mine. As people are not used to seeing solo travelers, the locals are super attentive and curious as well. And I made beautiful encounters. The number of people I know on the African continent is huge, and that's amazing. I've done a lot in other Western countries, but the strongest link I've created is in Africa, because people are genuinely interested and I'm quickly a part of their universe, which is cool.
Yes, that's the African hospitality.
Right.
Yes, definitely. It's actually a very interesting interview we had with Sandy. We explored her identity and her project, Abn Africa. It's time now to move to the social topic, that is Afro descent and full cultural appropriation.
So, to open the discussion on the second part, we begin by asking our guests, why is it important to take full ownership of our history and cultures? Cindy then confided in us her first reason. Our Afro communities have been affected by a process of domination, leading to the fact that our cultures, our norms, our spirituality, our language have been demonized in such a powerful way that we think it is the truth. When her mother arrived in France, it was forbidden to speak Creole and to even talk about Guadeloupe sometimes. This was rules made by our own family. She called it a recipe for disaster for one's own culture. So it's important to reclaim who you are. The second reason is that we are in a system of decolonization. Therefore, it's essential during this period to evolve with our own systems instead of drawing inspiration from our colonizers, and to value what is not our own. Africa must not continue to be inspired by what has been already done, or to be a counterfeit of Europe. Aimé Césaire quoted that he prefers hell to an absurdly failed version of paradise. Sandy added that many African institutions are taking on this path, and it's essential to free ourselves from it.
To her second point about the importance of reviewing our values, I added that we must reappropriate our cultures and find our history to rebuild ourselves, because we have lost our history, our values, and we were imposed on others' cultures due to colonization. To illustrate this idea, I presented a reference that comes from the podcast My African Cliché, which I talked about in a previous podcast. And in this episode of My African Cliché, entitled The Negro of Peter the Great from Cameroon to Imperial Russia, the narrator denounced Fatou Diom's speech saying that we must stop locking ourselves in slavery and colonization, and that Cheikh Anta Diop and all the others have already done all the work of memory. However, as he says, memory as a definition does not stop. It is not a disease, so one does not have to heal from one's memory. Therefore, we have to reclaim our memory and above all, not limit it to colonization. We have to learn about our heroes because they are the symbols of the identification of a nation and an entire continent.
I also added that knowing our past opens the doors to the future. Here in the US, we have a Black History Month in February. There's an article I read on the National Museum of African American Culture and History website stating that in 1988, the Smithsonian Institution, about to open an exhibition devoted to slavery, decided to investigate 10,000 Americans. And the results were quite fascinating. 92% of white respondents felt that slavery made little sense to them. These respondents often said that my family did not arrive until after the end of slavery. More worryingly, 79% of African Americans expressed no interest or embarrassment in slavery.
Sandy was actually quite impressed with the numbers, and I was too, 79 is a lot. And we all didn't think that they could be that high. Sandy added that one of the challenges we have is language, because most official languages in our African countries and the Western African countries are the language of colonizers. She recalled a quote from a German author who said that the limits of my language are the limits of my word. We communicate in a language that is not ours, so in a system of thoughts that is not ours, which can be a hindrance. Then I asked this question: how should we educate ourselves? I talked about Cheikh Anta Diop's statement that Egypt was black by scientific evidence and writings that clearly prove these facts. But it was not taken seriously because he's an African, because he's black. Whereas when Champollion, everyone knows Champollion, says the Egyptians were white, it was accepted a little more. All of that because Europeans admired the Egyptian culture and the European ideology could not accept to admire blacks. That's the only reason. We need to reclaim our symbols and encourage our historians.
Sandy added a passage of Felwine Sarr in his work Afrotopia, where he dreams of an Africa where we take seriously a black scientist, where we do not wait for the science of white to tell the truth. When a black or an African says something, you have to believe it at the same level as any other person. Yes. It's important not only to educate yourself, but to recognize where we will seek this information. I contributed by talking about the importance of the family in this matter. Children need to be encouraged to speak their language, even if they're in a different country from their home country. Sandy insisted that we do not have excuses now, especially with social media and the technologies, as there are thousands of great ways to learn about Black history and Black successful people. There are so many accounts on Instagram where you can learn about different languages and websites where you can do courses on culture and learn about other countries. Not all these things existed at our parents' time, and we have to use it to our advantage.
And to close this conversation, we all gave our final words.
Sandy, our guest, ended with a passage by Felwine Sarr in Afrotopia, which she reinvents by pointing out that Africa and the countries of the Afro world have no one to catch up.
Yes.
It must build itself simply by following its own system and focus on being a better version of itself.
For my part, I added that we needed to debuild everything we were forced to learn, all those systems that have been implemented, And once we've done that, we would be able to succeed and actually fly to our brilliant future that I'm sure that as a continent we have.
Oh wow, that's what inspired me right now. Thank you. And my point was that it's never too late to educate yourself, right? You can do it through social media, like I'm doing right now, learning more about my language. You can do it through books, you can travel, so there's no more excuses.
So, this closed our discussion, and as in all our other episodes, it was time to move on to our recommendation, which can be books, YouTube channels, or even Instagram accounts. My recommendation is a book entitled Tituba, Black Witch of Salem. In French is Moi Tituba, sorcière de Salem. Written by Maryse Condé, who is a French and Guadeloupean author. So I didn't choose her by mistake. She talks about the Salem witches trial and that among it was a black woman and her name was Tituba.
My recommendation is an Instagram account called Bambara Words, as our discussion had few languages and cultural elements. So if you want to learn more about the Monigo language like me, follow them. And there are also other accounts for multiple African languages. You know, I follow the Wolof account and I follow the Ivory and Nushi account. So, you know, just go find them. Yeah.
Yes. I would recommend those. And finally, Sandy recommended an Instagram account. It's called Dokunvi. She called it an inspirational account. It was created by a couple of engineers from Martinique and Benin who decided to leave everything in France to go to Benin and start a business in organic culture. I wanted to add a last recommendation, that is for every single one listening to this podcast to follow Abnafrica on its Instagram and on its website. It's very useful because you have a list of Black African business gifts that could be really, really useful because Christmas is coming. So I'm just telling you that. You can be inspired by her and it will help you also to plan your next trip to the afterwards. So go check Abnafrica. So, thank you everyone for listening. Follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram. You just have to type Powerful African Women.
Check out our website, www.powerfulafricanwoman.com, to sign up for our power mentoring programs or read our articles.
And give us your opinions, suggestions, or comments. Share as much as possible to strengthen the Power Network.
You can also reach out to us through email at powerfulafricanwoman@gmail.com. Give us your opinion, ask us any questions, or just send us some love. We take everything.
And don't forget to bring out the power in you.